everybody, it's Ryan again. This is my second Vramble. I am on the way home from my psychiatrist's office, and don't worry, these Vrambles aren't all going to be me driving. So, I wanted to talk to you today about my webcomics. Specifically, my main webcomic, which is called The Talking Boxes. My other webcomic is called Wugs, and I will talk to you about that at a later date. That's something for my next Vramble, maybe. So, I am a cartoonist. I've been drawing cartoons and comic strips for about 20 years. But when I first started, all I could draw were stick people. And then I moved up to more advanced stick people, and I would draw these Stickman comics, and I'd draw them in class, and I'd share them with my best friend, Mike. And one day, Mike and I were sitting behind the school, and I was showing him my latest strips. And he told me, the art in these strips is bad, but the dialogue is funny, So you could probably just, instead of stickmen, you could probably just draw two boxes talking to each other, and that would still be funny. And he said something like that. I don't remember exactly. It was 20 years ago. This is the story as I remember it, but Mike might remember it a little bit differently. It doesn't matter though. So he facetiously suggested that I could draw boxes talking to each other, and that my writing was strong enough that it would still be funny, even with very crude art. So I thought it would be funny and ironic if I actually did it. So I did. I drew, I went away and I drew two little squares, and I put some lines on them for eyes, and I called them Box 1 and Box 2, and I showed them to Mike the next day. And it was just supposed to be a one-off kind of joke, but it snowballed, and I added some more characters. The talking triangle, who's a triangle, obviously, and a floating eyeball named Flope. And that's the main cast. And Mike and I, we would draw and share Talking Boxes strips all throughout high school. And I continued to draw the Talking Boxes for years after I got out of school. And at first, I wanted to be like Bill Watterson, I love Calvin and Hobbes. And I also love Bloom County. And the strip was kind of an imitation of them, of the kind of gags and the kind of dialogue that they had in them. But as I got older, and once I left school, the strip became very overtly opinionated, and I started talking about society and religion and hot topics, current events, stuff like that. And I'm not actually very proud of that period of the Talking Boxes, because I didn't know what the fuck I was talking about. I'm just some dingus. I don't know. Who cares about my opinion, But at the time, I was very passionate about standing up and saying what I thought through the comic, As I say, it became less the Talking Boxes and more the Talking Soapbox. So, at some point, 3 years ago, Mike contacted me, is what I mean to say, and he said, I can get us a site if you want to make the Talking Boxes into a webcomic. He had noticed some other comics that I had drawn, and I had moved into digital art, whereas TTV had always been on paper. And he saw that I was working on comics, and he had this great idea. And I said, yeah, I'd love to do that. I'd love to bring the Talking Boxes to a big audience, make it into a web comic. I'm losing my light here, sorry. So I set about the work of developing this strip for a webcomic. And this meant throwing out commentary altogether. I wasn't going to talk about politics, religion, or pop culture, or anything. There wasn't going to be a podium anymore. It wasn't going to be a pulpit. I wasn't going to opine through this strip. I just wanted it to be silly and fun. And I decided that it was going to be, the humor was going to be a little arbitrary and weird, and that I was going to try to see what I could get if every time the strip started to make sense, I yanked it in the other direction. And actually, like, when I started drawing it, I didn't have, well, when I started drawing it for the webcomic, I didn't have a really good grasp, a really fully developed idea of what I wanted the strip to be. And it's only now that the Talking Boxes webcomic, which, by the way, it's published every Wednesday. There's a new strip every Wednesday at talkingboxes.net. So it's only now 3 years into the life of the webcomic that I'm starting to get a good handle on exactly what it is I'm endeavoring to do. I started to realize fairly recently that the Talking Boxes, which I thought was a very simple idea, I thought was just very straightforward. You have these simple characters, almost featureless characters, and then some really pretty backgrounds, and just, the real weird conversations that don't go anywhere, and, arbitrary humor. I thought it was very simple. I started to realize that it isn't. It's actually fairly brainy. And this came as a real shock to me. I didn't know I was creating something brainy. But I've embraced it. It's actually almost Dada, in that I want to do something that is the opposite of what other people are doing. If a webcomic is supposed to be funny, sometimes I want to be unfunny. If you're supposed to get it, the Talking Boxes, maybe you don't get it. Maybe that's the point. If other people are doing narrative, I want to do the opposite of narrative. No narrative, non-episodic. Or, and this is even more fun, do narratives with stories that don't have endings, or that have stupid endings. The resolutions, are dumb, or they're anticlimactic. What happens when you do that? What happens when you write that way? That's what the Talking Boxes has become, an experiment in what happens when you do everything wrong, or what happens when you do the opposite of what other people are doing. And as I said, anytime the strip looks like it's going in a predictable direction, or anytime it looks like narrative is developing, I pull it away. I grab the reins and I jerk the strip in the other direction. When you're writing narrative fiction, you can't exert too much control on your story. Obviously, you gotta You have to have your hand on the reins at all times. But if you try to force your story to go in a different direction, if you try to impose your will on your story too much, then you'll lose it. It will look like something that, if you force it, it'll look like something that's forced. And you really have to let your story kind of guide you sometimes. I don't like that phraseology because it makes it, I don't know, it just seems a little bit too romantic, but I feel that it's apt here. When you're writing narrative fiction, you have to leave some room for the story to control itself. But when I'm writing the talking boxes, I try and control it. I try and maintain a very strict hold on where it goes. And that's pretty deliberate at this point. I want to know what happens when you apply too much control. When you don't let the story go in a way, if you don't let the story grow in an organic way and instead you engineer everything, how do you get humor out of that? How can you make something fun and light and funny when you're putting so much control on it? When it's yoked by your will. What I'm saying is I want to do the talking boxes in a way that seems counterintuitive and still manage to create something that is funny. And I think that it's mostly successful in that. It's weird. It's a weird strip. A lot of it seems to be random, and a lot of it is. The biggest criticism that I get of the talking boxes is, I don't get it. And the only response to that is, well, that's kind of the point. Everybody does narrative. Everybody builds jokes in the same way. Set up, punchline. I remember Steve Martin in his book, Born Standing Up, which I really love, talking about how in stand-up comedy, or in comedy in general, you have the setup and the punchline, and the setup builds tension, and the punchline relieves tension. And that's why people laugh. And he says that he wondered what would happen if you didn't relieve the tension. If you just kept building up and building up. If there was no punchline and all build up, what would happen? And he said that in his experience building his comedy routines in this way, what he learned is that punchlines develop organically. People find their own places to laugh. It's not like they're laughing on cue once you reach the punchline. And I thought that was really interesting. The idea of building a joke in a way that is not organic and then still eliciting a response that is organic. Still having a punchline develop organically. It's like life finding a way, So that is my goal with the talking boxes. You should go to the talking boxes, go to talkingboxes.net and check it out. It's weird, it's unique, it's its own animal. It's not doing what anybody else is doing. And that's what makes it strong. That's why I think that you'll like it. So, my 15 minutes is almost up, and I'm losing my light anyway, so I gotta go. But check out the talkingboxes.net and leave a comment. How do people do this? Down there. and let me know what you think. Okay, thanks a lot. Once again, stay frosty. I'll see you next time.